can you guys maybe talk a little bit about the other countries and governments that are also sort of looking at cannabis and hemp and starting to build, a truly regional or continental kind of industry. And believe me, I understand that takes time, and there's lots of different cultural, religious, societal implications behind that. But I have talked to and seen a number of different governments down there that are throughout the continent working to expand the market. And unfortunately, globally, I think that people, when they think of African cannabis right now, they think pretty specifically of South Africa or Lesotho. But some of the other movements get lost.
Yeah, I'll give it a quick stab, Garth. We've engaged with a couple of countries, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Swaziland, Mozambique, Malawi. And it's a difficult process because they're a little bit behind us in the development, except Lesotho. And there's a bit of a conceptual issue because some of the models are, if you're part of government, you can grow. If you're a citizen, you get arrested. And there's some conceptual issues there in terms of the model.
Yep.
But South Africa cannot separate itself from Africa. And therefore, the term of our association is definitely African, and the intention is to spread the benefit across sub-Saharan Africa. Garth, you want to pick it up from there?
Yes, I think, unfortunately, some or many African countries have been characterized over the last few decades by maladministration and corruption. And I think our approach, which seeks to mobilize the private sector, communities, labor, to secure a optimal policy, regulatory and legislative framework, which excludes corruption and is transparent and inclusive, is the right way to go. Some African countries, and if you don't mind, I won't mention their names, have perhaps opened the gates for investment without putting in place a sufficiently robust policy and regulatory framework. And that carries its own dangers because it can sometimes open the door for malfeasance and rent seeking. And so I think the balance has to be how to secure an optimal policy and development framework and not spending the next 3 years working out a perfect blueprint. It's got to be a learning by doing process. Get the basics in place, secure investment, and have an inclusive process. Unless there are big investors in the room that can put up decortication plants and processing plants, a supply chain for small black farmers won't exist. And government has to come to the table to secure big investments to build the value chain and at the same time provide agricultural extension services, training, seeds, equipment, getting product to processing plant support, and so on and so forth. And so, Chris, one would be reluctant to name specific African countries, but I think sometimes there's a tendency to, in a understandable desire to secure investment quickly, perhaps err on the side of not getting a sufficiently robust policy framework in place. And that's a difficult balance, because first mover or early mover country advantage is important, and one understands that. And it's a difficult balance. There are going to be some failures and some, companies falling by the wayside, and it's going to be choppy water. But I'm convinced that if South Africa gets it right, it can have an important multiplier effect, because an optimal policy and regulatory framework can be used by other countries. And most importantly, we can get cross-border value chains working, whether it's upstream, seeds, equipment, technical knowledge, and so on and so forth, or downstream into the processing. And to answer your earlier question, there is unquestionably a market in South Africa for, and a market can be grown further for hemp and cannabis industry. But the export market is absolutely critical. I think the key question is, much of Africa is resource dependent, whether it's gold or diamonds or cobalt or iron ore. And the value addition downstream of primary mineral and agricultural products is very often not captured. And so part of our approach is, yes, we have to put plants in the ground, we have to get production happening, we have to have bud ready for export, but we've also got to get into the game of value addition downstream of primary production if we are going to capture maximum value for investors as well as communities and especially impoverished rural communities.